Hello, friends, and welcome to the Mission Podcast Mixtape Volume 2. I am so happy to share this special edition of the Mission Podcast with you, and I think you've got some great things in store for you. So in this episode, you're going to be hearing clips from my interview with Rachael A. Keefe. You're going to hear a clip from my talk with Xochitl Alvizo. You're going to hear a little bit from my discussion with Dr. Heather Berg, and then rounding it out, you're going to hear a little clip from my interview with Butler Bass. And as a special treat, I've recorded a short segment in there that's just me sharing a little bit about where I am right now and some exciting things that are going to be coming your way with the Mission Podcast. Our first clip is from my conversation with Pastor Rachael A. Keefe. In this clip, Rachael is starting to tell us about the process of writing her book, The Life-Saving Church, Faith Communities, and Suicide Prevention. It was a really great conversation. I really enjoyed all that she was able to share. I hope you enjoy it as well. Let's jump right in.
The book grew out of my journey, but as it sort of converged with my ministry. When I was working at the state hospital in New Hampshire as the clinical chaplain, the number one question I was asked is suicide a sin? Or how does God feel about suicide? And I had to come up with a response to that question that did not sort of give that person directly or indirectly permission to die by suicide.
Yeah. Wow.
And that challenged me to examine my own stuff.
Yeah.
Because I was a kid and young adult who struggled with suicidal ideation a lot. And I had one serious overdose when I was a teenager. And I had always been told in ministry not to talk about that.
Yeah.
You don't talk about it. You don't, God healed you. You're fine. You don't let anybody know. So when I was working at the state hospital, I had to put those pieces together. And it was a challenge. And at the same time, I was on the State Suicide Prevention Council, and I was working with the Mental Health Network for the United Church of Christ. And they needed someone who would talk about suicide at our, we were doing trainings yearly at that point. And they wanted someone to talk about suicide and faith. And I was like, there was dead silence on the phone. There's like 13 people on the phone, absolute silence. And I'm like, all right, I'll do it. And then I realized there was no way for me to talk about suicide and faith without telling my own story.
Yeah.
Because as I started really looking at this, I realized that it was the church of my childhood who saved my life.
Oh, wow.
They really showed up when I felt completely alone. And my home life wasn't spectacular, as you can imagine. One doesn't get to be a suicidal adolescent if life is perfect.
Right.
So there were lots of contributing factors. But I was 15 when I ended up in the hospital after an overdose. And the associate pastor of that church came to the hospital room. The senior pastor also did. The one who had more of an impact on my life was the associate pastor. And he kept coming back and he kept showing up. And then the church kind of rallied also and showed their unconditional support of me. And that meant something.
Yeah. Because
nobody said anything about it being a sin or you were going to hell. All they did was communicate that they loved and valued and wanted me there. They did not want me to die.
Yeah.
And while it took me decades to translate into that for God's love for me as an individual, that model for the church saving lives really struck me as vital and something worth sharing with the rest of the world.
Yeah. Yeah, you could see. What happened for you was the best part of church communities.
Right.
That's really what it's all about is helping carry each other's burdens and being there, showing up physically when people are at their lowest point.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they did that. And looking back, after years of being in the parish ministry, I realized that it wasn't really intentional. They just did what they did because I was a child of that church.
Yeah.
They knew me, they loved me, they showed up for me without thinking we're going to save her life. There was no,
right.
They just did what came naturally to them. Not that they were a perfect congregation, but in that moment they were perfect for me.
Yeah.
And that it saved my life and really gave me the shape of church at its best.
All right, you can find the rest of Rachel's interview on our podcast feed, and coming up next for you is a clip from my interview with Xochitl Alvizo. In this clip, we're talking about her incorporation of feminist theology wherever she steps and wherever she goes. Really love what she had to share here. Let's jump right in. Like you say, you've seen how things happen in community. So, how do you find the peace to stay within a tradition that continues to be masculine and has a lot of misogyny behind it? How do you stay in that and still feel like you can bring your perspective to the table?
So, like, I know, for example, people have to. So I've seen. And right now I'm saying people because this isn't my experience, but I've seen women who are able to stay in a very empowered way because they come to a place of seeing and knowing and being able to claim that this is their tradition, and they get to be part of defining that. So they're not accepting, an image of a patriarchal God, or they're not accepting an understanding of Jesus' death on the cross as, Jesus' sacrifice, right? Like the understanding Jesus' death on the cross as a sacrifice that needed to happen on their behalf. Women are engaged in Christianity and who reject that. Who say no. Like, we're not celebrating the death of Jesus as a sacrifice that was needed by a God who needed that death of, his son. Like, that's not what we're celebrating, And so they're able to claim a different interpretation of all of that. And so they stay because they have a different understanding of those things. And they see themselves as being just as important a participant as anybody else. And so they're not surrendering themselves to somebody else's, patriarchal, sexist, or abusive interpretation. They're able to find communities with whom they can share, the tradition in these ways where they're wrestling. Like, it's not like traditions just get reinvented. Like, some people have to leave. Some people stay because they're claiming their religious tradition and are bringing their voice to it. I participate, and I wrote this down earlier, because of two things, I think. One, it does make it hard when you have a feminist kind of lens. It does make it hard to just walk into as a person that's Christian identified, to walk any old church and enjoy the service. Like, I don't. I don't walk to any old church. But I am able, and like literally, emotionally, mentally, physically able to be with other Christian identified people, even when that service makes no sense to me. So for me, it's about, it doesn't hurt me. Like, it it actually only probably gives me more data for my projects, right? But for me, I'm committed to humans. I like humans in terms of like, I think we need to figure out how to do better. You know what I mean? And I think we can. And so, for example, for the church I participate in now I've been to Wednesday events, I've been to Sunday events, and you see cross section of people, like in terms of socioeconomic places and theological understandings and different levels of education and ethnicity and culturally and stuff, and so ethnically and culturally. So like there's not a lot of places where you see that mix, that coming together of different people. And sometimes religious traditions are the places that make that possible.
Absolutely loved what Xochitl was able to share there, and we are so honored to have her as our guest speaker here at Mission Hills next Sunday. So if you are in the Los Angeles area and you can get to Mission Hills, make sure you can get here next Sunday to see Xochitl speak. You're not going to want to miss it. So this next segment is the special segment that I recorded for you, giving you a little update on where I am right now and some of my goals for the Mission Podcast going ahead. So I hope you enjoy this. Let's jump right in. I wanted to kind of talk about what happened to me in seminary because up until seminary, I was this, nice Enneagram 2 who would walk into any church and I would be like, what do you need? Let me help. I'm ready to go. I'm ready to serve. And it brought me a lot of joy for a lot of years. And then I came into seminary, and for the first time, I was in a safe space where I was able to critique religion. I was actually able to critique what I was given, my beliefs. I was given the permission. So when I say I was able, I was given permission. My professors, they encouraged me to challenge these ideals that I held near and dear to my heart. So this was really exciting, but at the same time, it was kind of like giving someone the keys to a Ferrari who just got their learner's permit. I mean, I was now just learning how to drive, and I'm going 190 down the Autobahn, So while seminary was so freeing and so liberating and such a wonderful time in my life, it actually moved me on a completely different path than I thought it was. I mean, I enrolled in seminary thinking I will be a pastor, and halfway through seminary, I changed my major and decided, no, I actually don't want to be a pastor. And now what? I don't really know what to do from there. So there were a lot of little moments that led me to realize that I need to find something else for my life. I wanted to share a few resources for you. So if you're able to, I'd really encourage you to look up Barry Taylor and any of the work that he does. His class at Fuller really changed how I viewed Christianity and how I talked about Christianity. So I'd really encourage you to look up his work. I'd also recommend you look up The Idolatry of God by Peter Rollins. That's another book that helped me understand my obsession with certainty, especially with my certainty in my salvation. So that was a really good book. And then something also that really impacted my view on Christianity was the movie Silence by Martin Scorsese. And I talk about this in another episode, and I don't want to give too much into it, but really this movie challenges how you view what it means to be an evangelist and to share the good word of the gospel. And so I realized with all of these things kind of hit me at once. And I was in a very vulnerable space. My whole reality, I had so much certainty, and this is where a lot of the idolatry of God comes in. I had so much certainty in what I quote unquote knew about Christianity. And then with reading one book and taking a couple classes at Fuller, I had like 20 some years of Christian doctrinal theology just melt away right before my eyes. It was like it was like you had the most picture perfect artwork, or you had this beautiful unsolvable math problem that you just created. You spent your whole life on it, and someone came up with a wet rag and just erased it right in front of you. And that was so terrifying. I can't tell you, and that's